Do you know why it's called the Bledisloe Cup?
I do. Yeah, I actually have spent the last 10 days sat with
It's just
Tony
such a rugby
Johnson.
nose. Like, come on. I was doing some research last night, but you explain because
Yeah, okay,
over
well, I'll
here when I
explain
talk
him.
to people you talk to people in the US about Bledisloe Cup, and it's something that as a rugby fan it's been around for obviously since the 30s. But everyone's like, "What is it? The Bledisloe Cup? What is this?" So go on, give us a little bit of a
So
history
the
lesson.
guy who's been doing my commentary with me, he's called Tony Johnson. The guy's written books on the All Blacks. Like he times my nerdness by about 15 around the All Blacks. He's so nerdy, I've just now got a rundown every single taxi trip. The last 20 years, I can tell you where the All Blacks hotels were in Tokyo. It's a joke, the man's knowledge. The reason why it's the Bledisloe Cup is named after Lord Bledisloe. It's the 1930s. He was the general of New Zealand at the time. He was actually a British MP. He's the one that handed the trophy for the competition when it was Australia against New Zealand. However, the competition hasn't actually been played for that length of time because the trophy, believe it or not, got lost and suddenly popped up in a Melbourne changing room where they found it and thought, actually, we'll make this a thing again. And in the late 80s, it started being contested more regularly. But it wasn't until Australia won it for one of the few times they've actually had won it and were lording it over New Zealand. And for anyone that knows the rivalries between Australia and New Zealand, it's pretty full on. Like they're at each other all the time. In any sport, it's a massive rivalry. So when Australia actually eventually won it, bear in mind New Zealand won it for many, many years preceding it, it then became a little bit of a thing. Went to two tests, and then eventually, as it is now, as a three-test format. But get this, if you are 19 years old in New Zealand or Australia, you will not have watched Australia win a Bledisloe Cup. That is the dominance that New Zealand have in that competition. And I tell you what, they let Australia know all the time that they're the ones with the records.
I've seen this. So Australia have won 12 times, I think, and New Zealand 48. I don't know if that's fully up to date. But that's what it says on Wikipedia. So Australia haven't beaten them in 19 years in a Bledisloe Cup.
Um, they haven't won the Bledisloe, which you obviously have to get the 2 and 3, 2 out of 3
Right.
to have won it. But I mean,
Yeah.
that's an insane one. The last time they did win it was on the back of the 2003 campaign, where they had a really good World Cup run. And Eddie Jones, the master tactician, one of the things that he's very good at is curating pathways and plans to try and do one huge thing. And for him, it was always beating the All Blacks. He managed to do it with England in the World Cup semi-final, which was the most amazing game for England. But he also did it for Australia against New Zealand back in 2003. So there really has been quite a sparse amount of victories for Australia in the Bledisloe, and say they're not too shy of telling them quite often.
What do you reckon this year then? Because did you watch any of the Australia France series?
I just
Just
told you, man.
happened.
I watch it all. I watch it all. First and foremost,
Sorry,
we've got
when
to
you
say
watched
it
the
off the
Australia
start.
France series, what did you think of it? It was kind of one that it was a great series actually, wasn't it?
Oh, it was one of the best series out there. There was actually one day where there was basically 12 hours of rugby throughout the whole globe, just bouncing around. And the one that caught my eye most was the deciding test. But if you did see it,
Mhm.
and anybody did watch it, it was France's, I'd say it was France's second and a half, maybe third strength team. So they were well into the doldrums of the players that they could have chosen. I mean, still great players, and don't get me wrong, the top 14 in France is one of the strongest leagues. So they had good quality players, but by no means was it their best test 15. They went into it, and it was an absolute meltdown from the French. They had the game in their hands. The first one, where they had a line out, all they had to do was kick the ball out. But rather than just kicking it out straight away, the nine tried to hit the fly half, who then went to try and kick it, missed it. Pass went on the floor, then Australia got the ball, and for three phases went on. So the drama was there, the energy was there. Because they had the crowds, it looked pretty cool as well. And actually, the people that came away from that, I would have said, were the French having kudos, because, like I say, they were down to their bare bones of a team, and yet still managed to be very competitive. In fact, were just that brain explosion away from winning a Test series against Australia.
Pretty pretty amazing feat. Although was it Autumn Nation Series when they would nearly beat England with like a third or fourth team as well? The French
Yeah,
seem to
same
do
thing.
very
Yeah,
well when they're playing their third team.
it tends to be a
So they
very
should
French
just do
approach
that.
to it. They just throw their hands up, going, "Who we got playing this week?" Well, we've got, yeah, he might be able to play. He'll come along. He's got his boots, so he can be in. It's just so French. The laissez-faire is for a reason, isn't it? The French are known to be
Yeah.
pretty relaxed in how they go about their admin.
So, let's talk about laissez-faire. Did you see? What did you think of the sending off in the final test and the dramatics of the French eight?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that. There was actually a couple of moments in the last few days where there's been a little bit of amateur dramatics. I hate the fact that players can manipulate situations, and we kind of pride ourselves in the world of rugby as being it's a thug's game, but it's played by gentlemen. And when you see moments like that, it's very very football or soccer, for us in the UK. It's something that I don't ever wish to see in a game. And what's more concerning it's not even the fact that he embarrassed himself as a professional elite rugby player. It's the fact that some kids around the world who then watch it might try and emulate it, and the quicker we stamp that type of thing out, the better.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, it's still when you think about refereeing though, and the TMO and everything we have now, it's still amazing that they made that decision to send Marique off when it was clear that it was dramatics. But
Yeah, but
um,
you got to from the rest perspective, they're given these directives which they have to hit, and anything to do with head contact at the moment is almost default
yeah,
mid-range ban. They can't even go against it because as soon as head injuries start coming into the game, as the US audience will know all too well, you're in a very, very dangerous position.
yeah, I suppose it's a good. It's coming from someone who's had a lot of head injuries. It's a good thing that
Yeah,
that they're being
definitely.
so strict on it. But it's there's always going to be those fine margins, isn't there? Where there's a where there's something that is close because he clearly hit his shoulder first, maybe slid up a little bit, but the Aussies, I can't believe that they played with 14 men for what like 76 minutes or something and still
Oh,
managed
it's
to pull
amazing.
off the win. So it
Yeah,
seems like they're
and
in a pretty decent spot. Like going into the Rugby Championship and going into this first Bledisloe, it seems like Australian rugby's got a little bit of its mojo back. Do
but have
you
you got any
agree?
Australian in you? Are you part Australian to say something like that? I mean,
I am
they're
absolutely
basically
not. I do have some family that are Australian. They'll be very happy that I said that.
well, but they got past a ropey French 15. The thing to look at whenever you look at the New Zealand Australia parameters of performance is the Trans Tasman. So the Super Rugby teams play each other in almost a dual league where the five Australian
Yeah.
teams will take on so the four Australian teams will take on the Kiwi teams. That is not good reading. That is really not good reading. They won 2 games out of 25. The New Zealand franchises are almost test quality teams. And that is why they go so well. I mean, you've got these players being exposed to that environment week in, week out. The Super Rugby Aotearoa was a brilliant competition. You watched the Super Rugby AU, it just wasn't the same. Like the levels are not there. The strength and depth isn't there. So whilst Australia might well have gone reasonably against France, the problem is that strength of depth that they just don't have. And the thing that really goes against the Australians is what they've deemed Gitto's law. So only now 2 players from abroad can play into a test team or a test squad unless they've got over 60 caps. So basically, the one standout player for Australia from the sevens is Samu Karevi. He's the guy that they are desperate to get. They tried to pull him out of the Olympics. He's currently playing in Japan. They're going to give him dispensation to play in the Rugby Championship because he is 100% a game changer. He is undoubtedly one of the best Australian rugby players and could go on to be a great. But at just 23, he's decided to move away from Australia to make some family decisions. And that's a really interesting thing to talk about because you would never get a Kiwi at that age, that stage of the game, doing that. It would be about growth, development, opportunity, earn the right to wear an All Black shirt. So I actually think the Australian squad for the Rugby Championship isn't overly strong, certainly when you compare it to an All Black squad.
Although they have brought Quaid back into the mix, haven't they? So you never know what could happen.
Yeah, he's a good player. Although you'd like to think he would get Australian citizenship, he's actually not got an Australian passport, which is a joke. He's quite vocal on
That
social
is
media about it.
so many. I haven't read the full articles on that, but that just seems like I don't know. It's almost like clickbaity. Like, how can that be the case if you play
Yeah,
for your country so many times and actually a citizen of the country? Like it seems
Crazy.
bizarre.
Well, he is a Kiwi. He is a Kiwi. But I mean, in terms of what he's done for Australian rugby, he's probably up there with like the first five names you'd mention from any Australian era. Really, he's that exceptional when he plays the game.
Oh, absolutely. So you think that you think New Zealand are just gonna just blow them away? It's gonna be another year with no Bledisloe for Australia.
Do mate? I think it's going to be another year chalked on the significant number. The tally chart is now into its fifth line of the markings. I think the team that will challenge New Zealand could well be like an Argentina, who are just so dogged and committed, and whatever game they're playing, they really do get stuck into them. South Africa will be interesting to see if they're finally tuned on the back of the Lions or just burnt out, and I think that can go one or two ways. The problem with New Zealand is, I say problem, it's a great quality, but because of their strength and depth, what they can do is nurture these younger players. And if you do have a look through their squad, which is always an intriguing read, purely because the way they go about announcing it. So the whole of the nation sit watching TV as the chief of selectors reads out their selection. Players find out at the same time as the general public, which I absolutely love. They have this way of incubating their talent. So you don't really ever get an 18-year-old Kiwi player coming through as a breakout. You have players that have 2 or 3 years of really earning the right to potentially become an All Black. So they got the likes of someone like Armour as a hooker, massive G unit. Saw him play in the under-20s championship about 5 years ago, and he destroyed the field. He's only got 2 caps. He's 24. Will Jordan, a guy that would walk into any test team on the planet, he's 22, but he's only got 5 caps. So these guys are slowly coming through as great players. And even Hoskins Sototu, who's basically come into form in the last probably 24 months, I'd say, on the back of the Super Rugby stuff. He's another player, 22 years old, or 23, I think he is now. He's only got 6 caps. So when you combine those types of players with the likes of the Barretts of this world, the Whitelocks, the players that have been there, seen it, done it, that's why they are so hard to beat. And they are consistently bringing through 3 to 4 players, and they never, ever seem to stop this conveyor belt.
So you think they're building well towards 23 then in Paris because New Zealand are very good at like building up to the big moments, aren't they? Like as you say, like with the development of talent, like they're building up to the World Cup. Obviously, last World Cup, someone beat them pretty well.
Yeah.
But you think they're going to sort of be back to because at the moment they're not. Would you say I don't know if they're not definitively the best team in the world given the last couple of years right now. You think they following the rugby championship it's going to be clear they're back to the top. They're the ones to beat as always.
Well, I still would consider the best in the world. I just think England were amazing that day. I think if it were a New Zealand South Africa final, New Zealand would have beaten South Africa because that power game just doesn't work against them. In terms of their general skill set, in terms of the way they play the game and how they develop their talent, they are the best on the planet. And we've got to recognise that. England had a monumental game against them in that semi-final where everything went right. Manu Tuolangi breaking through, scoring in the first, 3 minutes of the game, set the tone for it. How well did England have to play and how well did teams generally have to play to beat New Zealand? And that's why it's always a challenge against them. The thing that they've also got is this world that they're now living in that seems unchanged, that, they've had 24 months of normality, and that it makes a big difference because you don't have to adjust like everyone else has to. You don't have to be an Argentina that's been camped away in a hotel for 4 or 5 weeks before you play a test game, or an Australian that are kind of not sure if they're going to be on this lockdown or not. And I hate the fact that we're in an age where we have to debate COVID protocols as part of preparation for test rugby, but that is the reality. And New Zealand, at this moment in time, are the most prepared. However, a long step forward. I know the Rugby Championship's a great marker for where teams are. But I do think about 2023 and that amazing World Cup that's going to happen. And the first game is going to be France versus New Zealand. And you're not allowed to mention French rugby in New Zealand for that quarterfinal a couple of World Cups back where they got dished. So there's a little bit of fear in the mind of any Southern Hemisphere teams, specifically New Zealand.